This is a conversation with Chuck Garcia. He's a professional speaker, author, radio host, mountaineer, and a professor of leadership development at Columbia University. He's the founder of Climb Leadership International, where he coaches executives on public speaking, emotional intelligence, and executive presence. He's also the author of Climb to the Top, Communication and Leadership Tactics to Take Your Career to New Heights. In this conversation, we discuss his journey, near-death experiences while mountaineering, and how that changed his life. 10 commandments for public speaking and leadership, public speaking as an art form, and executive presence. This is No Time. If you like what you see, then do hit subscribe on YouTube, follow on Spotify, or rate 5 stars on Apple Podcasts. This project is a labor of love, so if you'd like to see it continue, then do consider making a donation on Patreon. Thank you to the people who continuously do so. For other forms of love and support, you can follow this channel on Instagram or Twitter, or follow me personally. And now, American people, this is No Time. In tribute to your life and work, I've tried to structure this interview like a mountaineering expedition. So we're going to start right from the rock bottom. And as we start a climb, I would like to ask you some questions about your journey and your motivations.
Well, I love the way that you're framing it. It makes complete sense for anybody that knows me. We start at the origin at the bottom of the mountain. We assemble the team. We give thought and we gratitude to each other and wish each other a good journey.
Sounds good. And with that, let's start the journey. A couple of years ago, you were climbing Mount Elbrus in Russia. And doing the descent, you slipped and you started falling down the side of the mountain. As you were hurtling towards your death, you thankfully have been trained for these kind of situations. You took out your ice pick, struck it into the side of the mountain, and there you were hanging for your dear life at the side of Mount Elbrus. Your teammates heard you, they connected themselves to each other. Your teammate Mark came sliding down, connected himself to you, and you were safe. And in that moment, when you had just flirted with death, I'm sure there's a lot running through your mind. There's some fear, panic, anxiety, lots of embarrassment. In that moment, Mark looks at you and says, Chuck, hold on, pause. Just take a look around, look at the beauty in the world around you, look at the beauty in the sky above, and just take a moment to reflect on your life and reflect on the beauty in your life. And you've often said that that moment has stuck with you throughout and you'll never forget it.
Every day.
Every day. So my first question for you is, how important do you think it is for people to actually sit down, reflect on their life? And I don't just mean while mountaineering, but at home, at work, in the train, before an exam, after an exam. Do you think it is overtly romantic to try and find beauty in every single thing around you? Or do you think it actually makes life richer?
Well, thank you for the question and for the origin of this interview from a place of beauty and a place of love. What Mark did that day was the most emotionally intelligent moment I probably had in my life. And to put context into that event, we had already summited the mountain, and it was 11 days to the top, and it was grueling. We were tired, and my crampon on the ascent, after we had unclipped, hit a piece of granite, and I went tumbling down off the mountain. The good part about mountaineering is it's always in your head, but this could apply to engineering, finance. Do what you're trained to do. And as soon as I started falling, the muscle memory took over, and I immediately did what you described. What Mark did was a moment, and Mark was very smart and clever in wanting to ensure that I captured the moment to see the beauty in what to me at the time was a burden, but because I was safe and Mark knew it, he turned a burden into an opportunity, and I didn't even know it until that moment. When I look at the world around Shalaja and I see students, clients, everybody, or so many people are wrapped up in their busyness, in their activity, and they wear their busyness as a badge of honor. Oh, I'm so busy. Okay, I understand that. I don't take that away from anybody. But what I learned in that moment on Mount Elbrus, from that day forward, I started to self-initiate those moments. And as I did that, being on the subway, Metro North, in a car, I began to think differently, and I saw the sun when other people see the road. Just on Mount Elbrus, all I was thinking about is I'm going to fall off the mountain. And Mark encouraged me to stop. Look at the sky. It was a beautiful day that we summited. Blue sky, sun. Think about your family. It caused me, and it provoked a change in my mind, to take moments like that could have otherwise been disastrous, and just think about how blessed and fortunate we were to be in each other's company, to be able to achieve one of the 7 summits, to stand on the summit of Elbrus. But that was just a metaphor for the moments that I enjoy every day and remind myself how blessed I am to have been born to the parents that I had, for the love in my life, for the wonderful family that I have. The more that I can just stop the busyness and remind myself the good fortune of the people that are in my circle, it doesn't get any better.
Ever since that day, have you had another similar out-of-body experience where for a moment everything just stood still and you were able to get immersed in the beauty of life?
Yeah. I never know when they're going to happen, because this isn't the kind of thing that you plan, and I guess that's the point. It's what happens in the spontaneity. Now, that happened several years ago. I think it was 7 or 8 years ago when I climbed Elbrus. But ever since then, I've been very conscious of particular moments. In fact, I'm on my 2nd book, and it's called Moments. That's the working title of a book on emotional intelligence, where I try to help people understand, cherish those moments. They may happen in the spontaneity, but I think what I have done differently from that Elbrus experience, I don't wait for the moments, I create them now, because I know how special they are for me to take active, participant, contributory stance to what's in front of me. So now, often, on any particular day, I'm in a room, I will stand on the desk and I will look at it differently. And I will remind myself that sometimes we need to look at things in different ways in order to change our view, which changes our mind, which sometimes changes our heart. And when I capture those moments, those are change moments, that's where my growth occurs, and I do it often.
Speaking of growth, Mark Twain once said that the 2 most important days in your life are the day you're born and the day you find out why you're born. That day in Mount Elbrus was not the first time you flirted with death. On 9/11, you were supposed to be at the World Trade Center.
Yes, I was.
For a few hours when the disaster happened, everyone thought you were there.
Yes, they
on
did.
a dead list.
No question.
You were a dead man walking for a
I
couple
was
hours.
a dead man walking to everybody that knew me.
And then that moment was so pivotal in your life that you decided that now you want to focus more of your work and your efforts in the service of others.
No question.
So I want to take these 2 moments in your life where you flirted with death. And I want to ask you, from the day after 9/11, when you decide that now you want to shift your focus slightly, do you think by the day at Mount Elbrus, you had achieved everything that you wanted to do?
No. There were 2 independent events that it's easy to see how they were related, but 9/11 was the spark. It would led me to become a mountaineer. And on that day, on 9/11, when I was on the dead list for many hours, I made it back to the Bloomberg office and people couldn't believe I was alive. And one of my colleagues said to me, "Chuck, do yourself a favor, start walking throughout the entire building and I was in a very visible position because I was a public spokesman, and most of the company knew that I was scheduled to speak at an event on the Windows of the World. And they said, walk around, let people know you're alive. That's the best thing you can do right now because everyone thinks you're dead." But when I think about that moment, when I came back from walking the floor, Mike Bloomberg said to me, "Who's going to call the parents of 3 young Bloomberg employees that were in the building?" And it was me. And I called 2 of them, and they were the hardest phone calls I ever made. I was making a call to parents who didn't know who I was. They were taking a call they didn't know was coming. And I had to communicate to them, "We believe your son is dead. We don't know that. He was in the building, and we can confirm he was in the building." I reflected on that moment and I said, "Oh my God, I guess it wasn't my day to die. I cannot let this moment go without some catalyst to change." And I thought about, what can I do? Can I honor the spirit of my colleagues? And then I went to 15 or 16 funerals and memorial services in addition. So I said, I don't know if I can change the world, and I'm not even going to try. But there's one thing I can change, and that's myself. And if I change myself, what can I do with it? How do I change myself, and why? And I thought about that. Well, what I can do is honor the spirit of these 3 individuals of my Bloomberg colleagues that were there because of me. So I thought in my head, I always gravitated toward mountains. I've learned to ski since I was a little kid. I read a book called Into Thin Air about a year before 9/11, and I couldn't put it down. And even though Into Thin Air was a book about Mount Everest tragedies and people dying, I saw myself in that book. And I picked up other mountaineering books. It just sparked an interest in me. And oh my God, I have to do this. But what I read about, and this was another EQ moment, Shilaj, that I'll never forget. When mountaineers reach the summit of a mountain, on many mountains, there is a log book. And when you either sign in at the bottom of the mountain, or there are some mountains where you sign in when you reach the summit and you register your name and the time of the summit. I decided to climb Mount Rainier, which is in Washington State in the Cascades. It's the first mountain I ever climbed. I took that time after 9/11 to learn how to rock climb and ice climb. And exactly 1 year later, on 9/11/02, I stood on the summit of Mount Rainier. A wonderful, beautiful mountain, 14,400 feet above sea level. It's very well known in American mountaineering as a gateway to bigger mountains. When I signed the book, I didn't sign my name. I signed theirs. I climbed that mountain in the spirit of the three people that should not have died that day. But I didn't die that day, so what am I going to do about it? As I was considering what I just did in signing the book, I did it in the service of their life, that they gave their life because they went to attend a speech that I was going to give. And I thought about that on the descent. Wow, what else is happening here? And throughout the course of each mountain that I climbed, and I started to climb every year, Mount Kilimanjaro, and I climbed the Matterhorn, and then I climbed in the Andes, and I climbed in Alaska, and it hit me as I was coming down Mount Bona in Alaska. Oh my God, what did we just do here? This is just like my career. I didn't do it alone. I had a wonderful team behind me that we all helped each other in the service of each other on this treacherous, freezing, absolutely god-awful mountain. Look at what we've done together. And that's when I said, I am going to dedicate myself. I'm going to dedicate my life in the service of others. I don't know, nor do I want to be a mountain guide, but I am going to be a different kind of guide. I am going to be the proverbial mountain guide. I had a wonderful career. I can teach people to do what I did. And if I did that, every day I'm going to go to work as the mountain guide in the service of their success, because I can't think of anything I'd rather do.
You spoke quite extensively about changing yourself.
Right.
We are approaching the base camp of this interview. Before we start setting up the TEDs, I have one more question about changing yourself, about your journey. And this starts when you were even younger. In high school, you have often spoken that you were bullied extensively.
I was.
You were categorized as the fat kid, called a lot of names. And I've often noticed, it's just a personal observation, is that a lot of the kids who are bullied in high school, for most of them, this is very crippling, very destructive. But a very small subset, they actually use it as fuel to develop some soft skills that they feel can compensate for these perceived flaws. So they might develop a great personality, great communication skills, a sense of humor. A lot of comedians talk about being bullied in high school, some musical talent that they feel can then compensate for it. And I find this to be a very toxic environment, because not just for the kids who are bullied, but even the ones who get all the attention because they have the natural looks or the athleticism, in future in adulthood, when they actually lose that safety blanket, it becomes very hard for them to then develop communication skills, go out and meet people, develop a sense of humor. It becomes much tougher for them. In fact, the ideal position is for the kids who were bullied, and then they have a glow up and then everything comes together in the end. But I do think that this system, in a way it's set up, is quite destructive for both. Do you feel this exists, and do you think, is there a way to actually change our entire perspective where soft skills are not picked up by students who are outcast and they use it as a safety blanket or some form of coping mechanism, but actually integrate it into the education, which is what we're trying to do?
Yeah, and there's two different themes that's going on here. The first theme, I looked at, and for those of you seeing me on YouTube, I am 5'9", 175 pounds. I am the same weight that I was 40 years ago. But when I was in high school, at the age of 13, I was 4 inches shorter than I was and about 50, 60 pounds heavier. I don't remember the weights anymore. When I dropped all that weight, there was an incredible contrast between the way I looked before and the way I looked after. And what I saw is the same people that were treating me and bullying me before were no longer bullying. In fact, many of them were trying to befriend me. And they were befriending me now basically because I looked differently. But there's a few lessons out of here. Number one, in times of adversity, you find out who your friends are. No question. The people who loved me when I was 207 pounds and loved me at 155 are my friends for life. But you learn the most important aspect of what I try to teach in my teaching is empathy. You begin to identify other people's pain because I was that individual. I know exactly what it feels like. However, in high school, your success is defined by the inputs that you have gathered to cram, exam, and regurgitate your way to academic success. And when I thought about, I was a high-achieving student because that was the standard that my parents set for my brothers and me. That was much less important than what it is I felt in other people because I knew what it was like to be in such a terrible place. So the change that occurred in me at the age of 14 was so gargantuan in how I viewed the world and how the world not only viewed me, how the world treated me. And the lessons that I learned from how to be adaptable, how to read people, how to get along, became an incredibly important part of what I felt success was beyond my grade point average. So when I knew I was going to go to Wall Street, I acknowledged when it comes to brain power, I'm probably the dumbest guy in the room. I don't have that math keen intellect that other people have. And the point is, I don't need it. But high school doesn't tell you that. They cram into you that the path to success is the GPA, the SAT, get into the Ivy League school, and if you don't do that, you're a failure. Now, that doesn't happen to everybody, but I certainly see it in my undergraduate students that if I don't get into Columbia or Harvard, I'm going to be deemed a failure. You're kidding. I run counter to the definition of success, and I run 180 degrees away from the cram, exam, regurgitate model of success. The success is a balance between heart and mind, and that if you're 100% mind and zero heart, you're probably not someone I'm going to do business with. But if you find that you have an equilibrium, that you're very competent at what you do, all good, that's the mind. But you're honest and you're collaborative and you communicate with conviction and that you work in the service of something bigger than you, that's a successful individual that I want to work with. So I try, and even here at Columbia University, that I am so proud to teach, this program that I teach in called Professional Development and Leadership is so unbelievably supportive of bringing that soft skill considerations and these incredibly important career drivers to a universe of students that have been told something different.
I believe you. And I'm sure the work you're doing with the students, I've had the privilege of being in your class as well. It is definitely instrumental and something that we all find very, very ususeful. So thank you
I
for that.
I appreciate that. Oh, you're quite welcome.
We have reached the base camp of this interview. We have spoken.
I love this metaphor.
And you're going to keep running with it for
Yeah,
the next hour.
no, always. Everything to me is a mountain. Everything can be climbed.
Yeah. There we go. So we're here at the base camp. We've spoken a bit about your journey. And now I'd like to talk about some traits, skills for great communicators. In your book, Climb to the Top, you list down 10 commandments for great communicators. Can I ask you to give a taste of what these 10 commandments are? And I acknowledge this is a very difficult question.
No, it's a very easy question.
Is it?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, that's fine.
I live and breathe this stuff, so it's all good.
I thought I was going to get more and more difficult over time. This is a show of difficult
I love
questions.
this is who I am.
Perfect.
Well, first, for context, I spent a great deal of my career at Bloomberg as a public spokesman where I was on probably 150 stages a year, all over the world for many years. And in the finance world, London, Tokyo, Singapore, Hong Kong, Zurich, London, Geneva, they become your roots. And in all those financial centers, I had to learn how to address a Swiss-German audience and go to Geneva, a Swiss-French audience. You go to Hong Kong, Japan. You learn a lot about the touch points and what resonates to different cultures. So as I was speaking, and I have to say, I was not a trained speaker. People didn't train for things like that. I just happened to be a little bit better at this than many of my colleagues. So I was fortunate that I got the nod to take this job, and it was a dream job. As I was learning to communicate, and when I thought about writing my book and using climbing as a metaphor or mountaineering as a metaphor for climbing, I had to figure out, what am I doing? What are the things that people are saying to me? Wow, that was a great speech. And I never quite thought about what I do or how I do it. I just did it. So when I thought about, how do I put this into a framework that is simple and accessible that I can teach other people, it became pretty clear. In the Christian world, we grow with a Bible that talks about the 10 Commandments. Whether you're religious or not, I think everybody gets that this Bible, this King James Bible, has these commandments to live by. So the first thing I had to think about, what's the model? Okay, I'm sure there's 10 things I do. So I asked a friend of mine to sit in the audience one day, tell me what I do. And his name is Ed, and I'll never forget, and I'll thank him for that. Ed Weiss, if you're listening, thank you. He sat there and he started to make notes about what it is I did when I spoke to an audience. That gave birth to the 10 Commandments. And he said, Chuck, what you do is 1, 2, 3, 4, and there were 10 things. Beautiful, 10 Commandments. What I was doing, unbeknownst to me when I hadn't brought any science to it, I was using different techniques, very much what I'm doing right now. When I assembled the 10 Commandments, I did it in a particular order. So the frame of the 10 Commandments is chapter 1. It's called the primacy recency effect. It's the observation that when you speak, people tend to remember the first few things and the last few things, but not much in between. But even though they may not remember the words that you say, people never forget how you make them feel. Because communication is 55% visual, 38% tonality, and only 7% words. Because when you speak at 150 words a minute, nobody can remember all of them, but you don't forget the tone, and you certainly never forget what you see. So the second commandment then was called the power of emotional appeal. That's, instead of being so focused on what you're going to say, it's very much an expression of how you're going to say it. Do you say it with heart? Which leads us to the third commandment, which is speak with conviction. And the third commandment is actually teaching people to stop doing something. And unfortunately, and I'll pick on the Gen Z generation just for fun. So, it's like, it's kind of like, this pandemic, it's, yeah. If you were to go to Morgan Stanley and talk like that, I said, I can't let you go. You have to stop doing that. So unfortunately, many people pick up our bad habits of these things called filler words. So chapter 3 is the elimination of these verbal crutches. Chapter 4 is all about body language, the recognition that the body speaks before the mouth opens. When you walk into a meeting and you're sitting there and you're on your phone and everybody's walking in and you don't say hi, you are communicating in a very big way. Your body is speaking. Chapter 5 is called Minimize the Distance. It's based on TED Talks. I train people for TED Talks, and I help them understand. And you'll notice in my class, did I ever stand behind a podium? Never. Never will I put a barrier between me and my students. Chapter 6 is called the Rule of 3. It's a Greek rhetorical technique. A, B, C. If you eat Rice Krispies, you feel snap, crackle, and pop. If you were born in the United States, you appreciate life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Think about the rhythm. 1, 2, 3. 3 musketeers, 3 little pigs. The genie gives you 3 wishes. It's pretty obvious. And then the remainder of the chapter, and I think my favorite chapter, Salaj, is chapter 8. And Mark Twain, we love Mark Twain, and I dedicated an entire chapter. He said, the right word may be effective, but no word was ever as effective as a rightly timed pause. Now, I'm exaggerating it on purpose, but that is juxtaposed to what was chapter 7 called the speaker punctuates. That's knowing in English and in the Western languages, we write, or those that have a Roman alphabet, we are taught to read and write with punctuation marks. When you're on a page, you see these squiggly lines and these question marks. It's prompting the reader or the writer to actually change the tonality. Hey, what's for lunch? You sometimes tend to go up a little bit. Chapter 7 is all about helping people the speaker, to punctuate, just like I've done now. Otherwise, every word is going to sound like a car driving at 55 miles an hour, and it gets very monotone, and it gets very boring. But I don't like to talk like that because people feel the effort that you're putting in, and they feel that passion. Then chapter 9 is about animating visuals. PowerPoint is not the enemy. PowerPoint's a great tool. People just don't use it quite particularly well. They're like stuffing all the words and letters on it. That's not what it's for. And then chapter 10 is about vocal variation. We vary the pitch. We vary the pace. Sometimes we go higher and sometimes we go lower. But the point is, when you engage someone, the more effort that you can bring to the variety of the way that you are communicating to someone, people simply appreciate it. And it's fun, it's passionate, and it removes any sense that this could be a monotonous conversation, but it takes effort, and people really appreciate that. So that's the 10 Commandments in a nutshell. Thank you for prompting me on that.
No, I must thank you for that extended elevator pitch for all the commandments. I think it's very useful, and if just people just watch a short clip of if this episode and just watch this part, it would really set them on the path towards becoming a great communicator, because you have nailed it right on the head. Okay, you began this by talking about how your friend used to observe you on stage, and he told you all these, what are the good
What am I
traits,
doing?
what are you doing right?
Yeah.
And I have a question for you based on that. Jerry Seinfeld used to joke about in his sets that the number one fear for most people is public speaking, and the number 2 fear is death. So for an average person at a funeral, they would prefer being in the casket rather than giving the eulogy. After having given so many speeches, lectures, interviews, do you still get nervous when you get in front of people? And if you do, I'm guessing it's a yes, you were nodding. Do you have any quick mental exercises, routines that just get you in the zone?
No, the answer is no. I don't get nervous. I used to get nervous. Okay. I did. I think when I started this career and I had to step on stage, I displayed many of the nervous traits that are pretty typical for someone who isn't a seasoned speaker. And everyone has something they give away in their nervousness. Sometimes it's you turn red. Sometimes the hands begin to shake. To me, I spoke too fast. And I spoke fast because I was very conscious that when I speak, I did it with enthusiasm. Because I always believed that the people who spoke to me with enthusiasm were the people that I wanted them to speak to me again. The people that were dull, I had no interest in listening to them. It just wasn't a good experience. So I learned over the course of becoming the person who I chose to be by living my values, by leading by example the things that I write and I teach. Not only do I not get nervous, this is who I am. This is who I have chose to become. If I'm on a stage, I speak the exact same way on that stage as we're doing right now in this room at Columbia University. When I go home tonight to my wife and my daughter at the dinner table, I'm sure we'll have dinner together tonight, you or anyone else would not notice one difference in how I speak to them at dinner opposed to standing on a stage in Radio City Music Hall in front of 5,000 people. I have no nerves, not because I'm a genius, because I learned how to condition them over the course of time. It's a lot like being an athlete. You condition to the adversity. You learn how some days you're all there and some days you're not. Some days are better than others. Can you explain it on a cricket player or on a baseball player? Why one day they're better than the other? I can't explain it. But it's the same when you communicate. So how do you try to find a standard that you apply to every approach of every time you speak, knowing some days aren't working? That's where you learn how to deal with the adversity that it's not working today. How am I going to adjust? Sometimes it's taking a glass of water, taking a deep breath, asking for a moment of their time. You begin to gain much greater confidence, and you can now get away with these things because people are giving you the permission to do it because you've earned it. So I think for I love Seinfeld's quote. I put it in chapter 7 of my book. But when I teach people to do what I do, the fear is prevalent. They are fearful of making mistakes. They're fearful of social judgment. Oh my God, what will they say about me? Will I make a mistake? People are so focused on perfection. It's a fool's errand when you communicate. In fact, probably with you in our class together, I might have thrown up my 3 rules. Number 1, and I do it in most classes. Number 1, don't be afraid to make mistakes. Be afraid of not learning from them. Number 2, strive for progress, not perfection. Many of my students will try to be perfect. That doesn't work. And number 3, don't look at this as a success or a failure. It's just feedback. Every time you speak is an opportunity to learn a little bit about yourself. So I got to this place through the mistakes that I've made and learning how to condition when things aren't perfect.
You mentioned something very interesting, and this is also touches upon a conversation we were having just before we started recording. When you spoke about athletes, you spoke about feedback. And I know in previous interviews, you mentioned how you used your weekly meetings at Bloomberg as a platform, almost like an open mic, to leave an impression and build your communication skills as well. Your mother's a pianist. Your father was in linguistics. You've brought in a lot of musical components into the work you've done. There's a beat of 3, of course, and the way you dissect language. I get the impression you view it completely like an art form, like it is.
Oh, no doubt. This is my art form.
This is an art. I agree
No
with you
question.
completely. But what I see is that in the world, when you talk about athletes, musicians, actors, often we are very selective about what we consider an art form. And the work they do for multiple reasons is treated as on a slightly higher pedestal. And if they are doing it well, then we call it a zone, or they're in a flow state. But we don't have these sublime spiritual words for something like giving a presentation, giving a speech, even something like a meeting or a group project. Do you feel there's a lack of, or maybe there's a shift in perspective that's required for these type of tasks where we need to really start treating them as an art form like you do, and that will really encourage people to dive much further into it?
Oh, I stand on a platform of vigilance that this is the greatest missing component in our education. When you train to be an engineer, a doctor, in my case, in finance, in the investment management world, it's very much rooted in the cram exam, no different than high school or college, and we treat that profession seriously. However, what happens to so many people in their career as they emerge? They get promoted on the strength of their technical competence to a job description that looks radically different. And many people will accept on faith, hey, you're a good engineer, you're technically competent, what the heck, why don't you go lead 100 other engineers? That very competent engineer, just by giving him that faith, does not build a bridge to be a leader of other engineers. It should be taught and treated like any other profession. And when it comes to communication, because we learn to speak from our parents, we're not even taught to listen. We're ordered to listen. We comply to listen. We're not taught. We're not taught to speak. We're taught to mimic. We're taught to simply say what somebody did with no forethought. I look at what I do as an art form because when I look at the musicians and the visual artists and you speak to them, they all talk about their influencers. So many of the musicians, Bach, Beethoven, Beatles, Led Zeppelin, they took from them things that helped them to create their own art. And it was Picasso who said, good artists borrow, great artists steal, right? So I stole Martin Luther King, thank you, Barack Obama, Ronald Reagan. I looked up to these wonderful communicators that were doing something that I was so enthralled by listening to them. How do I be one of that? I have no idea. Nobody teaches you that. They teach you to pass the bar exam, which is what Obama did. That's great, and it's wonderful accomplishment. But what happens after you pass that exam and you're expected to argue in front of a jury? That's a completely different skill set. Medicine. I'm sorry to inform you, Mr. and Mrs. Jones, but your baby has cancer. That has nothing to do with your medical license and everything to do with connecting to someone on a human level. Every profession that requires a dialogue, it is my hope that communication is juxtaposed to the technical aspect of it and that it is treated with the same rigor, respect, and professional acumen as the profession itself. And even for me, I learned the science of art and science of investment management because that was what I did in my career. I didn't know I could do what I did. But I came to realize as I was doing that, everybody was pretty good at it. When it came to technical competence, I couldn't tell one person was better than someone else. Everybody was smart. So everybody seemed competent. But who's climbing the ladder on the mountain of success? It's not based on technical competence. It's based on these soft skills. It's based on your ability to collaborate, how creative, how persuasive, how adaptable, and how emotionally intelligent you are. And what I just listed was the LinkedIn top 5 soft skills that I've showed you guys in class. The marketplace is telling you this is what we value. Number 1, creativity. Many people think creativity is just for the artists. Not at all. Can you imagine as an engineer? You want to build a bridge? Build a creative bridge. And then looking at 2, 3, 4, and 5. Persuasion. Everybody needs it. You go to Morgan Stanley, hire me. You go to JP Morgan, Bloomberg, Tesla, Google. You want to persuade them to hire you. They're going to see 10 brilliant engineers. All of them have 4 O's from Stanford, Columbia, Harvard, wherever that may be. Who are they going to pick? 1. They're going to pick on preference because they can't figure out the difference in your competence. Number 3 is the ability to collaborate. Number 4, adaptability, which we learned in COVID. And number 5, my favorite, emotional intelligence has finally made its way to the top 5 LinkedIn soft skill list. So I encourage everyone, you can make this art in communicating your own. You decide what you want to be and you find the toolkit to be it. I wrote the toolkit, A Climb to the Top, mostly for myself so I could codify what it is I do so I could help people. But I have to say, the number of people that have come back to me and said, Chuck, thank you for changing my life. And I said, no, I did not change your life. You changed your life. I'm just one of those individuals that gave you a tool by which you can change it. You made a strategic and intentional decision to change yourself. I just happen to be fortunate enough to be able to provide something that could help you to get there. And that art form is, to me, a number 1 in everything we do.
This resonates with me very strongly because I've always felt a well-crafted speech or just a discussion or an interview is just as artistic, just as sublime as a painting or a good song or maybe like a good acting performance. I've always viewed it that way. I just feel like, but we've never, at least at the world at large, we've never actually put them on the same pedestal, but I do. A good speech leaves me feeling the same way like a good painting would.
Well, it's prose and poetry. And a lot of the training that I do, when I train people at the executive level, before I even get to their talk, to their speech, we will recite poetry to each other. So I'm a big fan of Victorian poetry. I'm a fan of anything that particularly Old English is sometimes very hard to read. But when people begin to read it, if they can command the poetry of the Victorian era, now in our modern world, it makes the way we speak prose to each other much easier. So this prose poetry thing is the best path in my teaching methods for how to help people to see this as an art form and to let them know what you're about to do when you get on that stage is a piece of art, but you have to treat it that way. Not everybody does. Some don't give it the same respect. Oh, I'm a scientist. What do I need to do that? I'll just bury him with numbers. Well, you could. I'm trying to help you to do it better. I can't comment on the science, but what I can do is help you to tell a story about what it is you're doing in the science. That's what people are going to gravitate to. Think about when you communicate with someone. Develop the mindset that of all the rigor that you applied to become an engineer, a doctor, a lawyer, whatever it may be, that's wonderful. And it's great to see people thrive in the technical competence to become the profession that they want to. That's awesome. But what I have spent now for the last 8 years is a very big difference in who ascends those career mountains. And those that are doing it are taking seriously the importance of this art form of communication, of emotional intelligence, and of learning, and I say learning, how to stay calm under the weight of enormous expectations. And I can't emphasize that enough, because that too, there's a bit of an art and science in helping people under enormous pressure to communicate in ways that just takes all of the sting and all of the pressure and tension out of the room. The people who can do that become extraordinary leaders, but I can't say never. I've never known it to happen by accident. It is intentional, it is strategic, and it is something that requires years to get it right. If you have the patience, in fact, I would say to anyone in your 20s, if you're emerging in your careers, get ahead of this. This is the time. In fact, I wish I had gotten ahead of this. I waited a little longer. I shouldn't have, but I thought, you have to know everything, and you go to work every day and you do what you're told and hope for the best. Oh my God, was I wrong? Because that's what school teaches you to do. This communication art form could be your greatest asset. What do you have to lose by trying?
Communication is an art form. I'm going to start a merchandise. I'm going to start a cap. This is the only way to get the message across.
Correct.
Definitely going to do it. You also spoke about how speaking is largely emotional appeal.
Yes.
Very visual.
No question.
Maya Angelou once said that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but they'll never forget how you made them feel.
A key theme of my teaching. Yeah.
Right. You've had the honor and privilege of meeting many influential people in your life. One trait that I've heard about many influential people, they've been described by others as well, is they had this aura around them when they enter a room. And anyone who's telling you about it has to end it by saying you had to be there to experience it. You just, no words can do it justice. And just to explain it to laymen like me, they use words like aura, magic,
gravitas,
yeah, magnetism, energy,
charisma. It's all there.
And then it always has to end with, but it doesn't do justice. You had to be there.
Right.
Just the way they enter the room, when they look at you, when they speak, there is something there. There is a presence there.
Yeah.
Have you felt this in your life? And is there a name, one influential person that just comes to your mind when I talk about this?
No question. Well, what you're describing is something called executive presence. And executive presence has 3 foundations: appearance, communication. Now, appearance and communication are straightforward, well, relatively so. They're art forms, but they're straightforward. The third is the X factor. It's called gravitas. And gravitas is, I don't know exactly what you just described. I don't know what they did, but God, it was good how they did it. What I know, in fact, what I often teach people when I'm in a coaching session is entrances and exits. And Shakespeare said very early on, all the world is a stage and we are but merely players. Mind your entrance and your exits. What these people that you just described do is they know how to enter a room, they know how to hold a room, they command a room, and they know how to exit. So think about the rule of 3 now. When you walk into a room, you immediately set the tone in the visual, 55% and 38% tonality. They're not even listening to your words. They're just enamored of the way you walked into that room. This gravitas is a lot like art. I can't exactly describe it, but I know it when I see it. I had the pleasure and the good fortune of being in the gravity of Mike Bloomberg for many years. The smartest, most generous man I've ever known. I don't know how many billions he's worth, but he'll never talk about it. I never talked money with him. He was just a wonderful CEO, incredibly supportive of our success, provided every single resource we could. And he became, if anyone is listening internationally, and you may not know, he was the mayor of New York for 3 terms, and he ran for president in the last presidential campaign. I wish he had won. He had my vote. When he walked into a room, and he was probably an inch or 2 smaller than me, slight, not a big physical presence, but when he walked into a room, he commanded it. And what I talk about in chapter 4 of A Climb to the Top is the body speaks before the mouth opens. And what you're describing is when somebody walks into the room, their body is speaking. And when they begin to speak, That gravitas is gravity. There's a gravity in the room. But what are they doing? It's not magical. They're looking everybody in the eye. So everybody in that room felt like they've been seen. People just want to be seen. They also want to be heard. When you bring them into the discussion, you look them in the eye, check, see. You ask them their opinion. Oh my God, Mike Bloomberg asked me my opinion? Wow, I'll never forget that. Me, what could I possibly teach him? He let us be heard. And if you're seen and you're heard, the human being's most natural inclination is a sense of belonging. We want to feel like we're part of a community, and you can't do that if you don't feel like you belong. So these great Barack Obama, Martin Luther King, Nelson Mandela, probably my hero, and Winston Churchill. I think Winston Churchill and Mandela were my heroes. I watched every movie. I've read every book about those two gentlemen in totally different walks of life, different countries. They had it. But what did they do? It's the way they made people feel. Everyone who was in their gravity was seen. Everyone was heard. They made you feel like you matter and that you were there. That's what the great leaders do. I hope I can only aspire to be them. I certainly follow the tools that they have communicated to us on how to do it. I think some have a certain natural ability that they build on. But what I can say, none of it is an accident. They are all designed, conditioned, developed to be that.
What do you think it is? I know I take your point about it's very tough to explain. It's something we don't understand. But what do you think this aura is? And please feel free to dive into mysticism. I don't want any science in this.
Yeah.
But I always get the feeling that this is something beyond what's tangible, beyond what we understand. Science is not advanced enough to actually quantify what's happening here. Do you have a hunch on what's actually happening? I mean, we know they do it. We know we feel it. But is there something beyond?
If you look at in the Renaissance, there was a French scientist, philosopher named Descartes. And Descartes talked about the mind. And he talked about in the evolution of the Renaissance that we as human beings, what makes us so different is our minds. And that our minds are number one. In the 1990s, a guy from UCLA or USC, a guy from California named Antonio Damasio, wrote a book called Descartes' Error. And what he talked about is we are not thinking machines. Descartes had it wrong. We're feeling machines. That's what makes us different. It's the way we feel. We are the only species, maybe you could say it about a dog because you can sense when they're happy, but we are the only species that smiles and we frown. And you can tell if we're happy or sad by our eyes, by our mouth, by our body language. And what he talked about is this heart, that the mind and the heart are always a tug of war. And there's an old quote, the longest journey that any human being ever takes is the 18 inches that separates the heart from their mind. Because in school, we're taught all about the mind. You get great grades, that has nothing to do with the heart. And then you get into the world of business, of creating movements, of creating communities, that's all heart. I think what's going on there is not meant for us to be able to deconstruct it from the mind. I think that's what makes us human. I don't think we're meant to apply a metric to what's going on here. You, particularly, Shilaj, or anyone who's a data science major, you try to make sense of the world through business analytics, and I get it, and it's a cool thing. And it has its place. But I think there are some things in the human spirit that are not meant to be measured, that we can't explain. And that's how I feel when I'm in the presence of Winston Churchill. I can't bring science to that. I can only tell you if Nelson Mandela were to walk into the room right now, what I would do, I'd probably faint. Oh my God, my hero is in the room. That's not the mind. That's how we feel. And I regret that the educational model doesn't pay any credence to it. It's only about your mind. It's wrong. I think how we feel is a big factor in the lives that we live, the lives that we decide to make for ourselves, how we define success. Is success the path to happiness, or is happiness the path to success? I don't think we've answered that well. I don't think people have even thought about what's the difference. I see people succeeding and they're miserable. I've seen other people that don't succeed in the standard that someone else may apply, but they are very happy people, and those are the ones I want to be around. So what you're describing, I don't think it's meant to have an answer. All the scientists and the brilliant engineers here in this institution, we're doing this from Columbia University. God, they are intelligent and smart. And I love it. I love hanging around them. But there's just some things they're not meant to explain, and I think we should just let it be.
Just let it be. So intriguing. So intriguing. Okay. So we are almost near the summit of this interview.
I love that.
We are almost there. But just before we reach to the top, I would love for you to interpret what I've built with the Lego here. I'm not sure if you ended up building any major structures, but what do you think this is?
Well, I was certainly aware of those, and it's wonderful that you have them in front of you. In your left hand, what you have built is a container ship. That's what it looks like when I look at the high seas. I remember being in the port of Singapore, and I saw all these container ships pulling in. That's what they look like, and it reminds me of that. When I look at your right hand, what I'm looking at here, I'm looking at a modern apartment building in Midtown Manhattan on 47th Street and 8th Avenue. Because now the buildings that are going up in the city, they're trying to bring a very sleek, thin feel to the architecture. And you are building a New York City skyscraper apartment.
As someone who's house hunting in Midtown, this hits home. I'm sure they require at least 40x your income, guarantors. They require it all. Oh, it's a headache to get into.
Right. You better be a billionaire if you expect to pay the rent on the top floor of that building.
Just pocket change for me.
Right, nothing.
Just nothing.
All right.
Okay, so we are almost near the summit. I can see it on the horizon. But before we take the final few steps, I have to talk about your inspirations. We've already spoken a bit about them. What are some books, movies, or people that have strongly influenced in your life?
There are a couple movies that, to me, have been seminal in my own development and what I learned from my heroes. The first one I mentioned on Nelson Mandela is a movie made by Clint Eastwood called Invictus. And Invictus in Latin means unconquerable. And Invictus is a poem that was written in 1874. And the words of the poem is what Nelson Mandela used after 27 years of imprisonment on Robben Island. Those were the words that he used to stand up when all he wanted to do was to sit down. It was a wonderful movie about the development of the new nation of South Africa, but it was a movie about the emotional intelligence of Nelson Mandela. I think another movie that so inspired me is called The King's Speech. It was a movie with Colin Firth as the King of England just at the start of World War II, and Geoffrey Rush played his coach. I identified with that character because as a coach, I don't teach people who have a stammer like the king had, but I do teach people in very unconventional ways to remove the fear and to strip away all of the anxiety before they start to communicate. And I think it's a wonderful book a wonderful movie that if anybody wants to see the dynamic between teacher and student in an incredibly stressful and adversarial situation, which it was originally, turned out to be a wonderful lifelong partnership, I would say that. And then I want to make one other. Now, those are movies I saw probably 10, 12 years ago. I want to give a plug to a movie I've watched on Apple, or to a series I've watched on Apple Plus TV called Ted Lasso. And if anybody doesn't know Ted Lasso, it's the story of an American football coach who went to England to become a soccer coach or a football coach. And there's a whole lot more to it. There is not a better television show that I have watched in my entire life that shows the heart and soul of an individual who is emotionally intelligent better than the character Ted Lasso. When I started watching that series, I had to actually stop it. And it's like, oh my God, who wrote this? Who developed it? The inspiration and what we learn from watching that character in living in what is a completely hopeless, impossible situation, and the way that he treats people in order to manage that adversity is something to behold and an art form in itself. So I'd say just because I love the movies, those are my movie choices. I do want to make a plug for a couple books. There was one book that to me in my career was biblical, and I teach it here at Columbia, and it's called How to Win Friends and Influence People. I remember the first time I read that book, which was written in 1936, I couldn't believe what I was reading. I said, oh my God. I remember taking a psychology class in college at Syracuse, and I thought that's what we were going to learn. They taught us all these ridiculous theories that I could never remember. And all the theorists and the psychologists, I thought I was going to learn How do people behave? Human beings are a confounding species. We accept that. But the more that we can try to understand and relate to our brothers and sisters and how they behave and to help them, the book, How to Win Friends and Influence People, has had an enormous impact on me. And then I will also say Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl, the account of how he lived through the Holocaust. If ever I'm having a bad day, I think about that book, that we're all having good days. And I think lastly, it's not one particular book, but I'll give credit to a book. It's called Never Split the Difference. It's a book by
Chris Voss.
By Chris Voss. And he talked about, he was a hostage negotiator for the FBI. And he used the tools of emotional intelligence because somebody's life was at stake. But when you read the book, you don't read, oh, I'm going to learn to be a hostage negotiator, because that's not something I would ever do. I leave that to the people that want to do it. But what I learned from the techniques about how we treat other people and how to win people to your cause and how to persuade them, nobody taught us that in school. And so those are the kind of books that I've gravitated to, that here at Columbia, I try to bring into our classes here. Because being here now in my 6th year, I see the difference that the engineers, how much they appreciate. No one ever taught us this stuff. But I'm saying that not just for the Columbia engineers. Anyone, not only in a career, if you're in a marriage, if you have children, if you want to know how to treat your parents with love and respect, and sometimes you struggle to do so, I understand that. There's a lot of adversity and anxiety in the world. But the good news is there are plenty of tools to be able to help us. And then I want to give one last book. This is a book that has probably moved me in my last couple of years more than any book I've ever read. And it's called Live the Best Story of Your Life, written by a United States tennis professional. He's the tennis champion on the senior circuit for the U.S. Tennis Association in the Davis Cup and all of the professional tennis. He wrote a book called Live the Best Story of Your Life that helps people to come to terms and to grips with your old story and to write it out. And if you're serious about making a change in your life, he provides a tool and a template for how to write your new story. And your new story is one of hope and aspiration and love, and it has no limits. It is boundless. If you could write your story without limitation, what would it look like? Sit down and write it. But he just doesn't encourage you or inspire you. He teaches you in this book how to write your new story. I work with so many people that are struggling with something or that are at crossroads. And I understand that. I know what it's like to be in those tragic times. I know what it's like to be bullied, to fall off a mountain. I get it. But everybody's situation is different. So I can't apply all of the things that I know with my own biases to how I can help them. So what we can do is find the toolkits to help people to come to terms with the change that they want to be in the world. And if they're intentional about that change, there are no lack of tools out there to help you. But it is critical to be as committed to your change as you are committed to your engineering career, as you are committed to your marriage. Who is committing to you? Nobody will commit to your development the way you do. And that's to each individual who's listening. People aren't going to do it for you. You have to own it. Otherwise, it won't get done. Nothing changes if you don't change. And it's okay not to be okay. It's okay to struggle. We understand that. We're all each other's teachers. But it doesn't have to stay that way. Go out and get the book. And Bob Litwin, my friend, thank you so much for writing this marvelous book. I think about it every day. It had an enormous impact on how I see how I help people. Everyone can be in control, mostly. All things being equal, can be in control of their life. They get to make the rules. This book helps you to underscore the importance of writing your own story and then going out and living it.
Very rich list of inspirations, and I highly recommend all these books, and some books which I haven't read, I'm definitely going to check them out. I also wanted to ask you a question specifically about speakers. You have studied communication, you've studied the greatest speakers, you've touched a lot about good speakers. Who were some of the greatest speakers according to you in history or even now?
Well, certainly the interesting part about this great author named Mark Twain, he was reputed to be the greatest public speaker in the history of the world. However, there were no recording devices. So all
Yeah.
we could do is read about how people felt. And when Mark Twain, when a community said, Mark Twain is coming to speak, people flocked. They would pay double just to hear him. So while I've never heard Mark Twain, I've read all about his approach to public speaking. I would say I want to give a nod to Nelson Mandela, certainly Churchill that I mentioned. I think Barack Obama in the modern world, and this isn't about politics or who I support, as a communicator, he and Ronald Reagan, who was our president in the 1980s, and Obama, who was our president in 2008 to 2016, what a phenomenal communicator. He probably wrote his own version of the 10 Commandments. And then I want to give one other nod to Steve Jobs. When I watched Steve Jobs introduce the iPod, the iPad, all of the different Apple products, I was watching mastery like I'd never seen in the modern world. The simplicity of his message, the way he would communicate the benefits of the devices that Apple was creating. He didn't speak like an engineer. He didn't speak in features and functions. When he rolled out or initiated the iPod, he talked about 1,000 songs in your pocket. Such an easy thing to consider. Many engineers I know would have tried to impress me with all the look at the engineering of this thing. I don't care. 1,000 songs in my pocket. This is unheard of. It's unprecedented. Steve Jobs was a master, and I would encourage everyone to watch his 2005 commencement address at Stanford. That was, to me, for all of those that I've studied, probably the best commencement address I've ever seen or heard, and delivered with great conviction and aplomb. What I learned from that, priceless.
That commencement speech was one of the greatest speeches I've ever watched
No
as well.
question.
And I'm hoping my dots will connect in the future.
Oh, and let me, I know we're running on time, but I want to give Tim Ferriss credit. I read a book called The 4-Hour Workweek many years ago. And when we think about the 4-Hour Workweek, it's not about working 4 hours, although it was a catchy title. That book by Tim Ferriss, The 4-Hour Workweek, helped me to prompt my own entrepreneurial ambitions and to form my company. I'd encourage anyone who is either struggling or considering to start your own firm, but you don't know how, because entrepreneurship is even if you study it, I don't think it gets to the heart of what you really want to do. You have to figure that out yourself. You can learn a lot from other entrepreneurs, but I think you first have to get in touch with your inner self and decide, is this the mission that I want to live my life? His book, The 4-Hour Workweek, really helped me to clarify and to crystallize my own goals and how to start my company without the dependency of hiring these big, huge organizations, how to outsource, resources available to you when you are on a thin budget. That I'd encourage. Take a look at that book. Have you seen that book, Shalaj? Have you?
I've not, but I do listen to Tim Ferriss' podcast.
Yeah, the book is wonderful, and it's a very accessible read, but it's also it's very actionable, and it had a big effect on me.
Shout out to Tim Ferriss. I know you're watching.
Yeah, thanks, Tim.
Yeah.
He's got nothing to do.
Chuck, we are taking our final step towards the summit. We have reached the top, and now I only have 2 final questions for you. As we look down on your journey so far and all the work that you've done, what would you like your legacy to be like?
I want to express enormous gratitude to the people that I work with, to my parents in heaven. I lost my mom and dad to cancer many years ago, but they provided for me a foundation of be smart, be good at what you do, be competent. But my dad was the best teacher I ever had. And I lost my dad when I was 24 years old, many, many years ago. And I never forgot the influence he had on me. My father brought language to life. And while I had my Wall Street ambitions, I never dreamed that I would do anything. My father's never seen me do what I do. He's not seen me on the Columbia classroom. And I know if he could, how proud he would be, because I love this place. But my legacy is the understanding that it's not about who's the smartest, who's the most intelligent, who has the highest grades, that we are all each other's teachers. And that I think we are here in the service of each other, not in the service of ourselves. And what I hope that I can leave with the world is this communication art form that I have worked so diligently to develop, and how blessed I am to be able to bring it to the world, I hope. Treat your ability to communicate with the same rigor that you do in your profession. I don't know why that's not done. Well, that's up to each individual to take hold and to be responsible for the actions that will help you to be good at this. And if you can do this, it will make you a better engineer, doctor, athlete, whatever it is. Because there's two things that I want to leave. We are always communicating and we are always collaborating. That is never a moment in our professional lives where either one of them is not being done at often the same time. Yet why does the world pay scant attention to it? Well, Columbia University doesn't. That's what I love about teaching here, because there's such a huge commitment to this thing that I care about for my legacy. I'm not interested in the money, the whatever. I don't care about that. But I think we can help each other to make the world a better place if we just understand that if we help each other to be superior communicators, this is how we're going to make the world a better place.
As someone who had the privilege of being in few of your classes, I must say that you are creating that legacy, and it's an honor to actually just be a small part of it.
Oh, thank you.
And benefit from it. Final question, Chuck. We've planted the flag at the summit.
We're waving down.
We're waving down. It's soaring high. We've spoke about your journey, your motivations. We've spoken about great communicators, about presence. We've spoken about your inspirations. And now I want to channel Mark from Mount Elbrus and say, pause.
Yeah,
this is how we started. This is how he's going to end. My final question for you is, what do you think is the meaning of life?
Yeah. Well, as Pablo Picasso said, that the meaning of life is to find your gift. The purpose of life is to give it away. And I think when I think about the meaning of life for me, every day I give this, maybe it's a gift. I don't know what it is I do, what I have. Maybe it's a gift from all the people that influence me. The meaning of life is to find your gift. I have found it. I know what it is. I didn't always know that. I figured it out when I was 52 years old. My God, and I'm good at this. I love doing this, and it gets me paid. That's what's called the Japanese ikigai, the Venn diagram. What do you love? What are you good at? What gets you paid? Because we all have to make a living. Once I figured out the bullseye to my ikigai, which translates to reason for being, the meaning of life, find your gift, give it away all the time, every day, to everybody. And if you do that with kindness and generosity, people will start giving it away to others. This is the world that I hope we live in, the world of generosity, of hope. There's no good news coming out of anywhere. I don't know what's wrong with the world. But we can control our own news, and we can make the world a better place, not because of the idealism. We don't have to be driven by that. We can just do it one individual at a time, one student at a time. And the meaning of life, give your gift away. Don't keep it.
Find your gift, give it away.
Give it away.
Powerful meaning for life.
Thank you.
Chuck, if people want to connect with you, find out about your next work, what you're up to next, where can they find you?
Yeah, you can always find me on chuckgarcia.com. I'm on all the social media platforms, but I'm most active on LinkedIn. So if you just type in Chuck Garcia on LinkedIn, send me a message. Please connect with me and communicate. My website, Chuck Garcia. There's also a contact tab. You can find everything that I do in addition to my brand of A Climb to the Top, a book. You'll also see that my partners and I created an online learning platform called the Climb Leadership Institute, where we bring our communication tactics and the things that we teach to the world. So if you have the internet, you can find out and you can meet me. And we not only give you a platform for learning communication, we have regular Zoom calls on this as well, so people can practice their speech techniques with me. So thank you, Salaj, for the opportunity to collaborate with you. I always love collaborating with my students. And when you sent me the message and asked me to join you, there's no bigger high than that. There's no greater honor than when my students ask me to collaborate with them. That's what this is about. You've got a gift. You just gave it away. And I am honored and privileged to be able to have done this with you.
The honor and privilege is all mine. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.